Have you ever been challenged by God, confronted? Have you ever had a confrontation with God? Maybe there was a voice and it called you so clear that it woke you up. Or you may be somewhere and you turn to see if someone is there because you were sure you heard a voice speaking to you. It might have been through a dream. It might have been through a book that you were reading. Something really, really sunk in. It might have been through a quote that you read on somebody's Facebook page, or a sermon you heard, and you felt that sermon was for me today. Or through a godly man or woman that you may have been speaking with, and you walked away and you spoke right into my life today. Well, I've been confronted and challenged by God many times. And this past week, I was challenged by a picture that I saw on Facebook, and this quote was with it. And there was a man who was walking over a bridge, and a picture of Jesus, or the figure of Jesus, was so close to him. And the quote said, "You are never alone. Jesus is always with you." I believe that Jesus knows all about me. I believe he knows where I am. I believe he knows what I do and what I say. But to see that picture and read that quote, and just to picture Jesus right beside me as he is right now in the presence of his Holy Spirit, watching what I do, listening to my every conversation, following my every step, was indeed a challenge to me that day. And it is now. And it's like a confrontation. If we are trying every day to be more like Jesus, I think we can expect to be confronted. And I think we should expect to be challenged by him in thought, in word, and certainly in deed. Well, if we could imagine ourselves today in the area of Horeb and by some means find the bush where God spoke to Moses, I'm sure that it would look like any other desert bush to us. But as I just read, there was a time when that particular bush had great meaning, simply because it was there that God confronted and challenged Moses. It was there that Moses responded, and it was at that bush that a commitment was made. And so Moses sought God at the burning bush. He met God at that bush. He walked over to see what it was all about. And it was there that he had a life-changing experience. It was there that he accepted God's commission to lead the Hebrew people out of slavery and to the promised land. But for us to be challenged by God and to have an experience with God, we do not have to search out that same bush. And whatever it is that causes us to open our hearts to God, and whatever it is that takes us to draw closer to him, that can be for us an experience similar to Moses' experience at that burning bush. And this is how God calls or challenges us. When God speaks to us, or when he challenges us, first of all, we will need to have an awareness of him. And such an awareness that it will allow us to see him in any situation that we find ourselves in. Anyone else coming along may not have seen or heard God in the burning bush that day, but Moses did. And then most of us saw a burning bush as we walked along the road on fire, and the fire was not burning up the bush. We would probably not take off our shoes in reverence, would we? It's more likely that we would grab our phones or our camera to take a picture or do a video to put on Facebook so that our friends could see it. But you know, Christians often talk about God speaking to them in a situation or leading them to do something, and maybe God has spoken directly to you, or you have known in some way or another that the voice of God was speaking to you. Others speak about God showing himself to them in certain experiences or situations. And that can certainly be said when the events are interpreted through the eyes of faith. And someone who do not completely understand what I'm talking about might call it merely, well, that was some coincidence, or that was an accident, or that's just the way, the natural working out of events. But looking at it through the eyes of faith, the Christian can call it the working of the Holy Spirit. You see, it's important to have an awareness of God that will allow faith to come alive in any situation we find ourselves. Whether it's loneliness, whether we are frustrated about something, whether we have fear, anxiety, or even through a broken relationship. And any of the outward circumstances in which we find ourselves when we commit our lives to Him is the situation in which faith can come alive. When faith comes alive, any place can become a holy place. Any simple place. You may be in your house, standing by the kitchen sink. You may be sitting in your chair. You may be in an office. You may be in your car, at your places of employment. Any of these places can be transformed into a place of worship for anyone who is aware of the presence of God in their lives. And so the question being asked today is not the traditional question, what must I do to be saved? But the contemporary question, how can I find peace? How can I find wholeness and satisfaction and fulfillment? And of course, the answer to this question is found in Jesus Christ. Any place that faith comes alive becomes a holy place, and it becomes a place of the peace of God. We sing sometimes, there is a place of quiet rest, near to the heart of God. A place where sin cannot molest, near to the heart of God. And another line in one of the other verses is a place where all is joy and peace. And then we will recognize God's challenges, and we will recognize His presence when we are open to Him. You see, an openness to God will allow us to recognize Him when He makes Himself known to us. And Moses asked the question in verse 13. And he said, suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is His name? Then what shall I tell them? Now notice how God answered and identified Himself to Moses in verses 14 and 15. God said, I am who I am, and this is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. And God also said to Moses, say to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever, the name by which I am to be remembered from generation to generation. God was showing His continued presence, God of your fathers. God was showing Moses His self-existence when He said, I am. And He was showing Moses divine purpose when He answered, I am who I am. And so in that burning bush, Moses could plainly see the God of redemption, the God of deliverance. And so if we are open to God, that will also allow us to receive Him when He makes Himself known to us. You see, Moses not only asked who God was, he also asked the question of self-identity in verse 11. Who am I? Who am I? And we can ask ourselves that today. Who am I? Who was Moses anyway? Was he a child of Israel? Of Egypt? Was he a fugitive? Was he an adopted son of Pharaoh? Was he known as the priest's son-in-law? Was he a shepherd of Midian? Who was he? He was God's. He belonged to God. And so when we ask that question, who am I? As followers of Jesus Christ, we should be able to say, I am God's. I belong to God. A German theologian who, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, actually his name is, we heard a lot of him over a number of years. He took a strong stand against Hitler and Nazism, which later cost him his life. And he asked the same question in a prison cell. He said, who am I? He said, am I one person today and tomorrow another? Am I both at once? Am I a hypocrite before others and before myself a contemptible, woebegone weakling? Or is something within me still like a beaten army fleeing in disorder from victory already achieved? Who am I? They mock me, these lonely questions of mine. And I like this part. He said, whoever I am, thou knowest, O God, I am thine. Whoever I am, thou knowest, O God, I am thine. You see, when we are open to God, He shows us who we really are, His child. I am God's child. You are God's children. And He challenges me when I'm aware of Him. He challenges me when I am open to Him. And when you are aware, when you are open to Him, you will also recognize God's challenges, especially when you're obedient to Him. I wonder how this whole experience would have turned out if Moses had refused to obey God and had refused to accept God's commission for him. We would never have heard of the burning bush, and we probably would never have heard of Moses. God would have turned to someone else in some other way to deliver His people. But Moses was obedient, and as a result of his encounter with God, as well as Moses' understanding of that experience, the Israelites were freed from slavery in Egypt. And here is an excellent example of the course of obedience. God spoke, Moses obeyed, and lives were changed. And today God still speaks. And yes, even in this world that we live in today, where there are so many questions that we have, so many questions, God still speaks. God still speaks. Men and women and boys and girls, they still listen and they still obey, and lives are still being changed today. But obedience is absolutely necessary in a relationship with God. It's absolutely necessary to have a relationship with God. And in Philippians 2:8, Paul characterized Jesus as being obedient even to death on the cross. He also testified to King Agrippa that he was obedient to the vision he had of Christ on the road to Damascus in Acts 26. And St. Augustine was obedient to the voice that he heard in the garden saying, "Take and read." And he read the book of Romans and he found Christ. And the church found a preacher and a fine theologian. But where do we get the courage for obedience? We sing the chorus sometimes, courage to love Him and courage to serve Him. And that courage can only come from the presence of God. God promises Moses, and He promises us. Exodus 3:12 says, "I will be with you," right here, right beside you. And so courage comes when we are aware of God's presence. It comes when we are open to His leading. And it certainly comes when we are obedient. And so can we be assured of the outcome when we start on the path of obedience? Can we be assured of the outcome? No, not really. We can only see the outcome when it's all behind us. And that is what obedience and faith mean. We can know that God's presence is with us, that God accepts us, and that God will lead us, but we cannot know all that is involved until we begin the walk with God. And a sign was given that the children of Israel would worship God on that same mountain. Many things happened before they did, though. But they worshiped God on that same mountain. God may not challenge us through such a dramatic experience as a burning bush, but God does confront each one of us. And when our confrontation comes, may we possess the awareness of God that allows our faith to just come alive. May we be open enough to God's presence in our lives that we recognize Him when He comes to us. And may we be obedient to His still small voice speaking to us. May we realize afresh today that we are the hands of Christ. We are the lips of Christ. We are the feet of Christ. And may we respond even today with obedience and faith. May we be obedient to the voice of God as He speaks to you and as He speaks to me.